And so I think that what I have done, I'll speak from my own experience, that keys that seem important for creating community are a commitment to have your paths cross. It seems so obvious, but I know in Washington, or I suspect it was similar in Richmond, there's such a fragmentation and busyness that you get people in your Palm Pilot or your Franklin Planner, and it has to be 6 weeks out. And so you have to have just, I think, ongoing commitments to people are key to begin with. Secondly, I've seen a commitment to be vulnerable. And by vulnerable, I don't just mean transparent. I mean, I think anyone can kind of share their stuff. But vulnerability is actually when you allow the other people to shape you and to have an impact on you. So I think a commitment to have your paths crossed, I think a commitment to vulnerability. And part of that vulnerability for me, and this is different temperaments, but I've had to say to my married friends and families, hi, I'm sort of needy tonight. How about we watch a movie? Or I've had to voice that because what I found with a lot of my married friends is they actually sometimes have this image of single people being like all like free and out there, ooh, you're out on the scene. And you're like, oh, I'm so watching Love Boat reruns. So I think making that need known has been really key. And then lastly, I would say forgiveness. This was my grandmother, you know, the Southern Baptist lady from Texas. She's like, honey, the key to everything is forgiveness, forgiveness, forgiveness. And because I think everybody will fail us. And I think if we have that particular longing for intimacy that's unmet, marital intimacy that's unmet, sometimes the temptation is to put that longing onto the people around us, and then they inevitably will fail us. And so then it's like, they don't get me, I'm single, they're married, they're happy, they got their family. And so I think it's being able to forgive and forgive and forgive. And then praying, because community is hard in our culture. It is not just your issue or my issue or that person's issue. It is hard in our culture. So I think you can get people together to pray and say, let's pray that God would raise up, authentic, tight, real groups of friends in our Richmond circles. It is also a great starting place. I hope that helps a little bit. Yeah, sorry.
Have you ever thought that it might be not in God's plan for you?
Yeah, I've certainly considered that. Yeah. Yes, and the reality is, I don't know what the future holds, and it might not be in God's plan. I mean, I don't know, but I do know this: I still have a desire, and so I think this is the trick. And again, the issue might not be unintentional singleness; it might be some other issue for you. But I think the trick for all of us is to learn how to hold desire in its right place, which is neither vilifying it and saying, whatever, I don't need that desire, God is sufficient, I'm content, or conversely, worshiping our desire and demanding that it be realized for us to be able to be at rest and to be able to love and to be able to trust God. Does that make sense? Another, yeah, no.
Was there any hesitation in your decision to write this book in terms of being nailed to this identity?
Hello, definitely. Okay, so I'm on this talk show. And the guy's like, we have with us today Connally Gilliam. She's an expert in singleness. My worst possible nightmare. Yes, is the answer to your question. And so I didn't grow up thinking I wanted to write a book. I haven't cared about being a famous or even a not really famous but sort of out there kind of author. Like, that has not been a desire of mine. Though I do myself plenty of books, so please buy them. But I did it because I told one friend this. I said, I feel like God has taken this particular area and He has squeezed me down hard. And I think He did it because He knew that instead of it crushing me, words would come out. And beyond that, I'm just not enjoying the ride. Typically, generally. Yes, in the blue shirt, I think there was a question in the back. I did see you.
Yes, the point of, to find salvation, where God knows salvation. And I think when I was growing up in the Deep South, I was raised to think that there was a spiritual salvation, but then there was your other salvation was to get married. And that was your social salvation. And that you had to be married in order to be in much the same way that we thought about church. Consummated. Just there's a salvation in that. And so I have often looked in relationships for rescue, whether they were my friends or looking for that in a marriage. And I think that as I've grown older and not gotten married, I see my married friends looking for rescue too. So I just appreciate so much for putting forth those two concepts.
Good. And I do, first of all, I love your whole idea of their spiritual salvation and then their social salvation. I'm going to quote you in the future. And I think God did design us, basically, for the most part, for marriage. I mean, that seems to be what you see in Scripture, with exceptions. With exceptions. And so, I also think we live in a fallen world. And I think that creates tension. And so, learning how to navigate that seems to be the challenge for us, with still holding on to hope. There was another in the blue, and then we'll come back. Yeah.
I was just curious, do you think that there's just from a male perspective,
Yes.
have you had much interaction with people that, are males that are struggling with this? Maybe they have just a problem with women?
Oh, yeah. I mean, that's the gigantic other part of this, and I sometimes do the talk differently if it's a male-female audience, but I think men are so, on the whole, confused about what their role is relative to women. I mean, it's in small ways, and, who pays and who doesn't pay, but there's a sociologist, Barbara Whitehead, that says women really since about the year 1965 on have been raised to be what she calls independent freestanding irises, which means they're beautiful, they're self-sufficient, they can make it on their own. And there's some pros to that, like you can afford to buy a house or you can have meaningful work. I mean, there's some good things about that, so I don't at all belittle that. I'm grateful for that. But conversely, it's created, I think, some confusion for men about where do they fit relative to the women around them. And I see that a lot in Washington because the women who tend to come to Washington typically are pretty driven and pretty strong. And sometimes I think the men and women really don't know quite how to connect. As well, women now control more than half of the wealth in the country, I mean 51%, so that's a change. Women are now, depending on whose statistics you look at, 55 to 60% of the college student population. So that means women are getting better resourced on the whole. Now this is younger women than I am, but I think all those factors are coming together. Also with the breakdown and confusion of what gender is. What does it mean to be a woman? What does it mean to be a man? What's right sexuality? All those questions. All those questions are like a big stew. And they settle like a fog on so many of the men. Women tend to be more relational. So women tend to still push through the fog to try and connect. Men typically, not always, but typically are a bit less relational. And the fog and the lack of understanding make them insecure about moving forward as boldly. So I think the bottom line is a lot of men are really confused.
I was say my daughter recently married a guy, first time married at 34, her and 41, and I kind of found myself wondering, why is he such a great guy? Why is he didn't snap up before?
Yeah.
And I feel real guilty now,
Well, no, I mean, it's this tough, this two-edged sword, because you don't want to be scared about making judgments. I mean, there's funky stuff that goes on in relationship with people. You want to be able to see it and call it straight. But you also just want to not jump to your conclusions. I think maybe the white shirt.
Yes, this is a rather light question, perhaps. But have you gotten any dates out of writing this book?
Well, I've gotten some emails. There was one guy who started. This is what happened. He emails me. He's from Detroit, and he sends us a picture, and I think, well, maybe this is God. Maybe it's the answer to the man praying at my cousin's wedding reception. Okay, I don't know, but I email back and say, look, I'm not coming to Detroit anytime soon, so if you want to come to Washington and take me out to dinner, I'm game. And I thought, let's raise the stakes up and see what happens. And I said, but I can't do an email relationship. I'm busy, I don't do email, I'm getting stressed. And so he starts emailing me every day, of course, sending me his childhood pictures from his grandfather. And he starts telling me about how women don't understand him. And then finally he gets mad at me for not ever responding. So that's been one avenue. So I've actually gotten a couple guys like that. I mean, no stalkers, so I feel blessed. But, and what it has done, though, is opened up great portals for discussion with guys who I already know about these things. And when men feel safe, as a lot of y'all know, which they oftentimes don't as single men with other single women, but when they feel safe, you can really learn a lot about where they're coming from. And so that's been a plus from it. Yes?
This is a slightly different question.
Okay.
How did you write the book? How did you come to decide to sit down one day and start writing about it?
It's a good question, and I looked down at my watch, and it's just going to be our last question too. I came to write the book, I think, for two primary reasons. The first was that I hit about 31 or 32 and felt just lost. I mean, my mother, aunts, they were all married at 21 or 22, and I figured like 25 was reasonable, or maybe 28 if I was being flexible to God. And yeah, please God, I'm not big lesson through all this. And so I went into really just feeling, I don't know if it was despair, because I was still functioning, but on the inside, feeling really lost. And I say in the book, I felt like I ran out of breath. Been holding my breath, and I ran out of breath. And through that process, I began to see a couple things. I began to see that, yes, I could tend to idolize marriage, though it was still a good desire and worth having. And I began to see that I was not the only person going through this, that there were all these sort of attractive, savvy, together, faith-filled women that I would meet, as well as my friends who didn't have any particular faith background. And we all seemed to be in a similar boat. And so I was making these observations. And then I began to see God still showing up in it in ways that I never could have imagined. Those being a few examples from the chapter. So that was one set of it. Then it combined with the fear that Val talked about, that somehow I get labeled as the single chick. You know, like, oh, she talks about singleness, she's the expert, you know, and all that stuff. And so that's kind of pushing back and forth. And then truly, there was the sense, Connally, write the book. And so that's why I did it. And my hope has been that, not just about the book, but the bigger message would be, y'all, in a culture that is confusing and chaotic, that does not look like the culture of our mothers, God is still real, He is still good, and He is still showing up, and He will continue to do so. And that's where my hope is lodged. So I think that ends our time. Thanks, y'all.